One way to do it is you could gamify it and kind of say like, well, here's an incentive to manage food waste and set some sort of thresholds and say, for every whatever percent or every pound or every whatever, that we reduce, we're going to donate this much money to a local food bank.
Hi, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. I'm your host, Isolde Trachtenberg. On the show, you get my conversations with peak-performing thought leaders, creatives, and entrepreneurs. Every week, I bring you the latest scoop on what these incredible people do to succeed and how you can get their secrets and do it too. Whether we're talking about best practices for spending time creating, how to work the business part of your business, or how to keep in that innovative mindset so you can keep living and performing, you'll get practical and wise information to use in your work and in your life. And now, let's get on with the show. Hello, and welcome to the Innovative Mindset Podcast. My name is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I am your host, and I am thrilled that you're here. I'm also incredibly thrilled to welcome this week's guest. You're going to love this week's guest. If you follow me at all, you're going to love her. Dr. Aurora Benton is the founder of Astropto LLC, which offers courses, coaching, and consulting to advance sustainability in services industries. How awesome is that? Her passion is to make sustainability practical and positive for anyone with a passion to drive positive impact in and through their organizations. She loves helping people realize their potential while discovering a greater purpose for good in business. She also regularly speaks on both leadership and operational angles of implementing sustainability initiatives, which is a mouthful, and I'm really looking forward to finding out exactly what that means. She also coaches social entrepreneurs and nonprofit founders to help them develop strategy, improve their pitch performance, and measure social impact. Wow. Aurora, I am thrilled to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Isolde. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about what I do because I am super passionate about it. So be prepared for some.
Yay! No, that's awesome. And I'm super passionate about green initiatives and sustainability also, especially with my work through NASA. So doing environmental education in schools. So I was getting them while, you work with the adults. I got them while they were young. I got the K through 12 kids excited about doing recycling and composting and things like that. But I would love to, first of all, I'd love to know a little bit more about how you got to where you are. And also, what does it mean? You're a sustainability consultant. What is that? What do you do as a sustainability consultant?
Great question. So to start with, I got to where I'm at through, like most of us, when we get to a certain place in our career, we were on a journey and you reach a certain point where sometimes you think at a dead end and all of a sudden you're like, oh, there's another path over here. Or, things come into your life and just touch your heart and touch your mind in a way that makes you think, there's a career opportunity in this. And I would say probably about 20 years ago, I started getting really interested in this idea that business didn't have to be this siloed aspect of my life. As a very sort of, just passionate, social impact, spiritual kind of person, I didn't want business to be this thing that I did 9 to 5 or Monday through Friday or whenever the hours you work are. And then it sort of turns off the rest. And then you go out and do volunteer time. I wanted my volunteer time and my service time to be my business time, my working time. I wanted it all to be integrated. And I started learning more about this idea of social impact investing and the idea of companies who had for-profit models to be able to support what would traditionally be supported by charities. So, for example, social enterprises that give job opportunities to those who face barriers to employment, such as those coming out of incarceration, addiction, abuse, etc. And so the idea that like, oh wow, these people can get dignity in work, they can develop skills, and they can produce a product with a market value that can be sold rather than all of the money for those activities coming through donations and foundations and philanthropy, which all that's great. I'm not putting down any of that. It's just, wow, what a great way to supplement that. And I'd rather know that I'm buying a product from an organization that is giving that kind of opportunity than a just a traditional product where I'm not even sure who's making the product, where it's made, how it's made, the safety and wellness of the people making it, et cetera. So I just began to explore that more and more and more. And over the years, just looking for ways to manifest that in what I was doing. So I started actually mentoring some entrepreneurs back in 2008. I taught a class at a community center to immigrants to help them start businesses. Then in 2011 and 12, I was helping co found an incubator for social entrepreneurs. So I did a lot of coaching and helping them develop, their strategic plans and improve operations and marketing and things like that. And I still do that kind of work today. And then I started teaching. I was actually a professor. I've had my professional background has kind of been all over the place. I've worked in software, retail, financial services, and higher education. And so when I was working in higher education, I started teaching classes on sustainability and corporate social responsibility. And so just kind of even further deepened my knowledge and awareness. And then I had an opportunity to go to through a doctorate program, a doctorate in business administration, and they had a focus on social impact management. So it was just like the right, like this is the topic, right? I always wanted to get a doctorate degree, and there was the topic for me. And so then in early 2016, I was working for a higher education company, a for-profit company, and they sold the division that I worked for to European investors, and all the US positions were eliminated. So I found myself in this position where I was listening to this little voice in my head. This little voice in my head had been saying to me for about 5 years, one day I want to work full time in CSR, corporate social responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, at the time I was 46. So I was like, what day are you waiting on? Like, what, who, and I was starting to really actually also kind of tap into more of a feminist mindset that I had previously kind of rejected. Like, oh, I don't feel like being a woman's ever held me back. And I just really went through some awakening about that and read some books and realized, like, oh my gosh, the fact that I even question my opportunity and ability to do this is a result of really like being a woman and how I've been approached about things over, that's probably a whole separate podcast. But, I just really kind of confronted that and said to myself, like, seriously, look at all you've accomplished in your life. Like, what? Why are you waiting on someone else to give you permission to pursue your dream? That's just silly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, I've got two options. I can either get a full time job in sustainability and corporate social responsibility, or I can start my own company. And I knew that I didn't have the resume to, excuse me, to get that full time job because I didn't have a series of sustainability related jobs that would
Mm-hmm.
get me into that kind of, especially for where I was in my career, the title and the salary that I would feel like I deserved. And so I thought, well, that's going to be a big uphill climb. And so is starting a company. So why don't I start a company? And if in the process of networking myself into gigs for as a consultant, maybe I'll find a job. That would be okay too. And so I did that. I started a Strato. A Strato means to illuminate, and my mission is shedding light on social and environmental issues in the workplace and empowering people to address them one step at a time. So that's how I got to where I am today.
Wow. Wow, amazing. So I have so many questions. So you decided that you were going to do this. And I love the fact that you went, you know what? This is not on my resume, but it's my passion, so this is what I'm going to do. And this whole idea of if not now, when, which I think is fabulous. What were the challenges that you had? You started your company and obviously didn't go for a job if it was offered. You're still doing your company. What were the challenges in starting that process to get to get companies on board? That's something I'm really curious about. Do you find that people in these companies buy in pretty easily, or is it an uphill battle? What is the process, and what are the challenges for getting a company excited about social responsibility and environmental responsibility?
Yeah, so I think, the first step is really the first part of the question. And the first thing you have to do when you're doing something like what I've done is you have to figure out what it means to be an entrepreneur, right? So one of the earlier challenges that I faced, and I knew going in because I had done freelance consulting before, and because I had mentored entrepreneurs for a decade, it was a little bit of a moment where I could practice what I preach, and see, do I really have what it takes to be an entrepreneur? And so I knew that one of the struggles that I would have, and one of the challenges that I would have to overcome, is closing sales.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm great at marketing and communication, but closing a sale takes a different level of confidence and courage, and it's a different kind of conversation. And
Mm-hmm.
what was so fascinating about that, like I really confronted that head on. I was very intentional about it. So early on, I knew I had to learn how to set some boundaries around pricing, and I had to be a little more aggressive than maybe I normally would be when it comes to follow up, and also learning how to take small projects that I did for free or
Mm-hmm.
very cheap and talk about them with a great sense of pride and really elevating, I did this. And
Mm-hmm.
that's again going back to maybe that feminist thing, and just the entrepreneurial thing as well. When you are having to sell your own services, you have to learn to really make the absolute most of what you've accomplished. And all of the sort of like, oh, I can't really say that about myself, oh, that's too, like, you all that just has to go out the window.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, in that first year or so of my company, I just really developed a lot of confidence where I could talk about the things that I was doing and be really proud. Just not like haughty, not like, oh, I'm just, patting myself on the back, but just more like, I did this and I was appreciated for what I did. And I have testimonials for what I did. And there's no reason why I shouldn't share with other people the great thing I've done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just being willing to do that from a very authentic and just joyful place made that was really attractive to people. And the fact that I just studied everything I could get my hands on about sustainability. I took all kind, I did certifications and studied, and I could talk the talk. So I could talk the talk and I could walk the walk, and people were very attracted to the fact that I knew what I was talking about. I knew how to listen to what problem they had and give them a good solution in terms of, a path to get there, or, a project plan, strategy, etc. And and I think just also the fact that the doctorate doesn't hurt. That's for sure. That's absolutely for sure. So that's the first part of it, is just learning how to be an entrepreneur. And so what was very interesting, how this kind of coincides with my philosophy and brand that I developed. So that was the other thing, is it took at least a couple of years to kind of figure out, well, what is my voice in this place, right? So there's lots of sustainability consultants out there, and they're doing lots of different things. So one of the first things I had to choose was, I decided to focus in on specific industries.
Mm-hmm.
I've been broadening out a little bit now, but I think that was a really smart thing to do right away. And some people who'd been sustainability consultants for a long time, I asked them, should I be a generalist or should I focus in on industries? And several of them were immediately focused on an industry. And just even from a networking and sales perspective, it's easier to focus on an industry than trying to cast a net across everything. So I focused on hospitality, events, and travel.
Mm-hmm.
And I got very involved really early on in volunteer initiatives, industry initiatives. So, like developing standards and criteria for sustainability certifications, doing association education and things like that. And that, of course, was great networking and great experience building. But so back to this whole idea of closing the sale and sort of developing my early voice and philosophy and brand. One of the things that I was picking up pretty quickly as I began to network with other sustainability consultants across lots of industries, when I would look at what they post on, Twitter or LinkedIn primarily, um, I felt like there was this general theme of, the earth is burning, the sky is falling, it's never enough, it's never enough, it's never enough. And most people out there who need to make decisions and drive change that's going to lead to sustainable progress, they are very turned off by that message.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like one of the things we have to understand as sustainability practitioners. Now, there is a place for the people who are very involved in politics, who are very involved in advocacy. There's a place for protesting. There's a place for all of that. So I'm not putting down the earth is burning, the sky is falling message, because there's some actual truth, and we need to have a sense of urgency. But I recognized pretty quickly that most of the people that I had a heart for convincing to do things differently, I knew that those people would never listen to that message.
Mm.
And so I had to deliver a message, and in a way that would be approachable to that audience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very different approach to sustainability than what some people take. And I think there's a place for all of us. But I have found my niche and my lane in the way I do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, that relates to salesmanship or saleswomanship, however you want to say it. It relates to sales skills and sales and closing sales and influencing and psychology and human behavior and organizational behavior and all the soft, fluffy stuff that can be very difficult when you're trying to drive something that can be rather scientific and technical. But without the human element, without selling someone on an idea and selling them on their role in moving that idea forward, you don't go anywhere. So that's been a big part of my journey in sustainability and entrepreneurship.
Fabulous. I love that you said that you have to meet people where they are, where they can hear you. I think that's absolutely true, and I think what a wonderful way to communicate with people. Something that I'm curious about, and this goes back to the very beginning of what you started saying. What is sustainability? Like, I know we often go, oh, I know what the term means,
Hmm.
and we sort of gloss over. But what, since you're a sustainability consultant and you work specifically with companies, and you're in sort of focusing, or have been focusing on this, on the hospitality and catering travel industries, what does that mean? What does sustainability mean to you, and what do you think it means to the industries that you're working in?
Yeah, absolutely. It does encompass a broad range of topics. So a few decades ago, a Brundtland Commission came up with what's considered the technical or official definition of sustainability, which is the growth and development today without compromising the ability of future generations to grow and develop in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So that really does have a triple bottom line connotation. The
Mm-hmm.
people, so a healthy economy requires healthy people, and healthy people require a healthy planet. So you almost see these sort of nested circles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it really is about the bottom line. And I am a business person, so very much about, like, how can we use these things to make money or save money. It's about the people, so it's about dignity in work, it's about wellness, it's about labor practices, it's about safety, it's about all of those pieces. And then it's about communities, of course, that aspect as well. And then, of course, it's about the environment, right? So ranging from natural ecosystems and the delicate balance we need to maintain there, to climate action and water conservation, and of course the whole myriad of things that entails. So it's really such a broad term. And of course, there's all kinds of other related terms, right? So there's CSR, corporate social responsibility, social impact, positive impact, triple bottom line, ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance. All of these terms really are about an accountability and a responsibility to this concept of, if you want a healthy economy, you must have healthy people. And if you want healthy people, you must have a healthy planet. So that's how I see sustainability. And again, back to what I was saying earlier about meeting people where they're at, in some organizations, the only conversation you're going to be able to have is changing light bulbs. All right, if that's what you think sustainability is, let's talk about that. In fact, one of my first clients with Strapto, that is uh, I was working with a conference center that has a sustainability mission, and the director of sustainability, who's a person I love and admire so dearly. She's just an amazing, amazing advocate for sustainability. And so I worked with her to do an assessment of of the organization and kind of see where people were on sustainability. And so she said to me when I came in, she's like, "Well, what you're going to find is that they all just think sustainability is recycling." And so, and at the time, it was right around the time that China had said, we're not taking your recycling anymore. And, so it was just like their whole recycling market was just a kind of a big mess. And a lot of people felt like, and you still see this. I just saw this a couple of months ago, an article that said, the number one thing consumers think they ought to do is not the thing they should be doing. And I'm just like, please don't do that. Like, why make consumers feel bad for the one thing they think they're supposed to do, which is recycling? So, and obviously recycling is a big mess. We have a lot of infrastructure problems to fix and blah blah blah. But basically I interviewed people on the team, and I did some surveys and did this assessment, and I came back to her and I said, "You're not going to like what I have to say, but the first thing that you have to do is you have to fix recycling." And she was like, she had plans in the works to do, they have like a certified organic farm. They're doing solar panels. She was doing some really amazing stuff. And she wanted real good support and traction on all of that. Totally understandable. But I told her, I said, you're going to have to start with recycling, not because it's the most environmentally significant thing to do. But it's because you were right. Every single person in the organization brought it up. And they brought up things like, well, so and so in my office will never put their paper in the recycling bin. Our guests, our clients, people come in, they're confused by the signage. It came up in every single conversation. And
Wow.
so I said, that's where you have to start, not because it's what's going to have the greatest environmental impact, but because that's how you're going to make the relationships with these people. That's how you're going to get them to see that you're serious. And then it's going to be easier for you to do all those other things. And fast forward, a few years later, that was absolutely the case. She had much better cooperation and collaboration among people in the staff, and there was a greater appreciation for the fullness of what sustainability meant for the organization.
Hmm.
And so it really does come down to, if somebody defines it as recycling, okay, we'll start there. If that's what it takes. But I guarantee you that once you get passionate about recycling, once you start learning more about recycling, you won't be able to help yourself. You'll take it further and further and further.
I agree wholeheartedly, and it's so interesting. My sister, the one I was just talking to you about before we started recording the episode, who lives in Georgia, uh, she started recycling a few years ago, and it was this interesting mindset shift. She went from, oh, I'm recycling, to now she's militant about it. And one of the things that happened was that she started really loving when she had more stuff to take to the recycling center than she had trash bags. It
It was
became
like a game. It
it was a
becomes a
game,
game, right?
exactly, a game and a source of pride. And when she told me that, I thought that's really fantastic. That shift that allows you to start thinking of it as something that is beautiful and wonderful. And there is a question here, I promise, but there was a wonderful, I guess, ad campaign about getting the people in Texas to recycle a few years ago, and the slogan was "Don't mess with Texas," and it was designed to help people recycle, to start them getting into the mindset of recycling is a good thing. But they wanted it to be a very sort of Texans have a reputation for being a little tougher, if you will. And
Hmm.
so this idea of don't mess with Texas worked incredibly well, and they started getting more and more people excited about recycling, like my sister got. So when you're in a process of working with a company, and let's say it's recycling that you start with, how do you evaluate what the best way in is for these different companies that you and organizations that you work with?
So, it's easy to start with where the biggest pain points are. So, one of the things that I was doing a lot pre-COVID was working with larger scale caterers in convention centers on food waste.
Mm.
clearly food waste at a convention center is going to be a top of mind issue for a caterer. And how I got in there, of course, is there's a long and beautiful story of just that's all about networking and showing up and being your best in any given moment and meeting the right people at the right time and being patient and persistent and developing the relationships, and then eventually, like, oh wow, okay, now I'm training multiple locations. But I will say that what I do when I do this training, so I was working with my main client in this regard is an organization called Centerplate. They're at many locations around the U.S. They're owned by a global company, Sodexo, so real massive,
Mm.
and in lots of different places. But their convention center business under Centerplate, I trained, I don't know, I think 8 different locations before COVID hit, and just wonderful and amazing stuff that they were doing in response to food waste. But what I found is I would go into each location and have a baseline of training information ready, and I would do pre-calls with them. I would have them fill out a survey. I would do some, sort of pre-meeting them, sometimes in person, sometimes on a call, and just kind of listen and hear what some of the hot spots were, and because there's some elements, and this is true with anything in sustainability, there are some things that are going to be fairly universal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there are going to be other things that are very contextual to the decision makers, contextual to the infrastructure in that city, contextual to just the moment in time.
Mm.
And so I would always leave room for some customization of the training. So it was maybe, you know, I'd say probably about 70% the same content everywhere and 30% highly customized. But that combination ended up being super powerful. And so what that looked like is every city that I would go to, I would include in my presentation statistics on the hunger rate for that city.
Mm.
And in some cities I was able to find even down to here's the difference between the hunger rate of certain minority groups or those who are disabled, or those the elderly or other people groups that, and when you show that to, and this is the other thing, is when I go into an organization, I can't control this, but I insist to the extent that I can that every department and every level be represented. A lot of times when you bring in Dr. Benton, and people tend to think like, oh, let's bring in the executive committee. No, no, no. I want the dishwasher, I want the banquet server, I want the line cook, I want someone from every level of the organization. And we need people who speak different languages, who can go back to their team and be like, oh my god, we had this training and this is what we learned, and oh no, no, you got to do this way now. And when I show the hunger statistics, a lot of times people in the room are like, yep, that's my neighborhood. I know exactly this situation because I see it or I grew up in it,
Mm.
right? Or then, another way to make this contextual is in some cities, everybody talks about composting, that's the answer to food waste. Really, not necessarily, right? Some cities don't have commercial composting. So, what kind of alternatives do we have available for a city where commercial composting isn't yet a thing, right? There's either not enough, there's not enough capacity to handle a large scale convention center in a lot of markets, right? So, it's all about being very, um, speaking to the people so that then that way they don't feel like I'm trying to rubber stamp a solution. And
Mm-hmm.
because it's also about, listen, I don't work here. I'm flying in for a couple of days. We're going to do some fun training and then I leave. And for this to be successful, you have to own it. You are the one who you guys have the the solutions already in your head. I'm just going to give you some interesting facts and some tips on some specific, like, practical things you can do, and then you're going to take it from there.
Mm.
Because if it's reliant on me, it's going to fail. I'm going to walk away, and I can come back a year from now and be like, so what did you do? And that's where the coaching comes in. I build into the model some follow-up coaching where
Mm-hmm.
I can hold them accountable. Like, okay, so you said you were going to do a food waste audit. Show me the data. Yeah, we didn't get around to that yet. So can we do a call next week? Yep. okay, here's our data, right? And so I think that that's how you really convince people is you make it. I think in especially in corporate scenarios where a lot of sustainability directives are sort of handed down from a corporate office, and
Mm.
that's those are great, right? You need, I mean, a lot of times you can get some really excellent um, guidance and tools and platforms and apps and things like that, but it still has to be contextual. And if somebody doesn't own it at the location and customize it for the people and the place and the needs there, it can just be a little bit lukewarm, a little watered down. And so I love being able to come in and give that sense of passion and ownership at on the ground, like with the people right there on the ground. So I tend to do more of that, like on the ground work, than I do educating the higher ups of the company. I do speak to both, but I really do have a passion for getting the people at the grassroots level of an organization involved. And that's not an easy thing to do. And everybody's always talking about executive buy-in, which is absolutely essential. But unfortunately, we put so much focus sometimes on executive buy-in that we forget that that is only part of the equation. And
Mm.
without the other part of the equation, the math does not work.
Hmm.
And so the executive can buy in, but if you don't have an organizational structure and culture and policies or whatever the mechanism is that gets it outside of the executive offices. Sometimes I go into, especially in hotels, and I ask about green teams. Oh yeah, we have a green team. Well, how often does it meet? Who's on it? Oh, well, it's the last 15 minutes of our quarterly executive meeting. That's not a green team. Like, that's you're checking a box
Right.
so that
That's
you
the
can
tip of the
say you
hat.
have a green team, right? And so I just think that it's so important to empower people who have the ability to make the choice to walk an extra 5 feet to throw an aluminum can in recycling instead of trash. Because an executive can hand down a policy saying, we're going to set up aluminum can recycling. But at the end of the day, the people who are walking back and forth down the hall who refuse to walk around that one extra corner, and then you get to talking to them and they're like, well, why can't we put the recycling can over here? Well, you can. How about we do that? And then all of a sudden the recycling rates go up, right? I mean, that's the kind of stuff that happens at that level of the organization. The executive is never going to be the person who's going to decide to move the can 5 feet around the corner to raise the recycling rates. But someone on the ground is seeing that and they won't say anything because they don't think they're going to be heard, or they think, well, they must have put it where they put it for a reason. And then it becomes this whole contentious thing when really it's like, just move the freaking can around the corner and
Right.
everybody will start using it, right? So that can be a little bit fun when you have those moments and you're like, this was so easy because all I did was empower someone to move a garbage can.
Yes and no, though. I mean, let's call it what it is. It's not an only. You didn't only do this because it sounds to me like you're helping the people who, with, as they say, boots on the ground, the ones who know that it's not as convenient to have the recycling bin where it is, and it would be more convenient. The management or the CEO might not know that. They might not ever go
Mhm.
into that office, for example.
Exactly.
So there's again, this is the Innovative Mindset podcast, and I'll say it that way. It's like that's the whole point for me, is that you're helping them innovate, you're helping them think differently, and not just giving them permission, but encouraging it, and in
Exactly.
many ways rewarding it. So I'm so
Mhm.
grateful that you do that. You said something that I'm very interested in, though. You said the words social impact. And what does that mean with respect to a catering company? How does a catering company have social impact, or I guess reorient towards thinking about social
Mhm.
impact in order to make a difference?
Yeah, there's so much opportunity. And again, I don't mean to sound like I'm an advertisement for Centerplate, but I have really loved the work that I did with them. And because of everything with COVID, I missed them. I missed that work a lot.
Mm.
But a lot of the organizations that I went into were doing already, doing some amazing things. So I'll just give you some examples that
Mm-hmm.
really demonstrate the variety of the kinds of things that can happen. So in one of the centers that I went in and trained, they had just done, and I think they do this on a monthly basis. They do a free breakfast for all first responders in that community. And
Mm,
so that's a regular thing that they do, right? And so the social impact in that regard is just appreciation and support for a population that often needs it, right? They have tough jobs. It's also just great public relations, and there's nothing wrong with that. Another one of the locations that I worked with, they had established a really excellent relationship with a guy who had started an addiction recovery organization, and he had somewhere around 325 people, mostly men, but men, women, and children who lived in temporary housing facilities, while they were kind of transitioning and overcoming addictions and such. And they had a really great relationship. They'd been picking up food, leftover food from the convention center for a very long time. In fact, their
mm,
relationship was so good that the convention center allowed this gentleman and his team to take their pans with the leftover food and knew that they would wash them and bring them back. Now they probably also washed them again once they were brought back, but that is very rare. And sometimes one of those barriers to donating food, besides the myth that people can be sued, which is a different topic and one that really needs to be elevated, but and highlighted. But sometimes there are these excuses like, oh, well, like storage, where are we going to put it, and where is it going to go, and who do we call, and just some of those little logistical things that get in the way. So
mm-hmm,
it's a very relationship driven thing. And then in another city, we worked with a local. This was actually really cool because when I went to the city to train, I was in a coffee shop that was just a really cool little coffee shop near my Airbnb, and I went in there, and I was just like, okay, I need a special angle for what we're going to do here. And I kind of had this idea in my mind, but I just wasn't sure like how to find it. Well, wouldn't you know, and I say this, I think this is where sometimes people are like, okay, but I really believe in this concept of, I mean, maybe it's like a serendipity type of thing, but I tell people, especially when it comes to like buy local programs and social impact programs, if you open your heart and set an intention that you're going to benefit a city. So I say this a lot to event planners because they're taking large economic impact events into different cities, right? And so they're kind of like they have a spread all around the world. And so I say, if you go into a city with your heart open and the intention that that you want to serve that city, listen to it and it will tell you what it needs and what it has. And so that's what I did in this city. And I'm checking out, getting my delicious like vanilla bourbon latte or something like that.
ooh,
And I know it was so good. And it was like a freezing cold day and it was just perfect. And there's a pamphlet at the register for a local high school that trains those with intellectual disability, so on the autism spectrum, Down syndrome, etc. And they train them in the culinary arts and help them get part-time jobs because they can actually work up to they can actually work and still collect benefits, which is something that a lot of the parents don't understand, that they can actually, for those that can do work, that they can both bring in some income and still have their disability benefits.
mm,
And so we contacted them, and for one of the events that was held at the convention center, brought in a team of their students, and some helped in the kitchen and some worked out on the floor serving at serving stations, because the director of this high school said some of his students really needed more social interaction and interaction directly with guests. So it was an opportunity to give them that kind of practice and experience. So, I mean, it's just like, just think about that already, just that diversity of social impact. It's really limited only by your own creativity and the relationships that you can build in any given market.
absolutely. And it's so, you reminded me of something that I used to do when I used to, in my 20s, when I lived in Washington, D.C. uh, I don't know if you've ever been around a Vie de France. Did you ever? It's kind of like the Atlanta Bread Company was, sort
Oh,
of
yes,
a.
yes, yes.
So We had, well, I used to work at the National Geographic Society many moons ago, and we had a Vie de France right across the street from where I worked. And they did this thing with their, because at the end of the night, they had to throw out all the croissants and bagels and cookies and whatever that they didn't sell because they couldn't sell day old, I guess. And so what they decided to do is instead they had this little program, and I don't know that it was company wide, it was just that one franchise. They opened it up to, if you came by in the evening at closing time, they would give you huge bags full of the stuff they didn't sell. And so my friend Heidi and I, we were Wednesday. There was a somebody for every day of the week, and every Wednesday evening, Heidi and I would go to the Vie de France. We would grab the plastic bags full of food, and then we would just walk around different parts of DC, giving the food out to homeless people. That was just something we did,
I love
and
it.
it reminded me of what you were talking about. Not on the same scale, of course, but that idea of taking the food and not wasting it, not letting it sit in a landfill, but instead providing nourishment and some fun sweets. I won't pass up a chocolate croissant if somebody offers it to me. So how do we as a society make that shift to thinking about that as a viable option? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, I feel like there's two parts of that. One part is in the hospitality industry, we have to educate the industry about the liability protection they have through the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Act.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a fascinating situation where this myth pervades the industry. And you would think that there's just been dozens and dozens of lawsuits over the years, but there haven't been. And there's a law that protects hospitality companies when they donate in good faith using the same food safety practices they use to serve guests every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I go into even the places where I do food waste training and they donate. If I ask the audience, how many of you think you can get sued for donating? 75% of the hands always go up, even though they're working for an organization that donates. But it's because in the hospitality, there's a lot of turnover, a lot of mobility. And so a lot of times people have worked in other restaurants and other hotels and other kitchens and places where they've been told, no, we can't donate. And so part of it is the getting past the liability. And then the other part is logistics. And the there are some organizations in the US and I would imagine around the world and other markets as well that are really working on this. So for example, in Denver, there's an organization, I believe the name of it is We Don't Waste. And they're like an intermediary. So they have trucks. I think they have refrigerated trucks and they'll go around and pick up the food and then bring it back to a distribution center so that smaller organizations can pick up. And like that guy that I told you about it, the one guy who serves about 325 people a day through his addiction recovery, when he collects enough food from the convention center that's more than what he needs to feed his people, he has a little network of smaller nonprofits and
Mm-hmm.
churches, and
Mm-hmm.
he calls all of them and they come and get it, or he'll drive it around to them. So that whole logistics piece. And I remember I was doing a food waste project in Dallas, and one of the big uh, challenges there is that most of the food surplus happens on the north end of the city, at the metroplex, and most of the need is on the south end. Well, the time that it would take to get food from the north, the hotel, the nice hotels and the places, venues on the north side to the areas of need on the south side, in a city that doesn't have great public transportation, so the roads are pretty pretty heavy trafficked. That's a long time, right? So if you don't have a refrigerated truck, you could have a food safety issue, right? So the logistics is a thing that I think the food banks, like Feeding America and some of the food banks have been starting to work on apps, and there's been some small startups that have created some apps to help do matchmaking so that it's easier to find an organization that's willing to pick up your, whatever. So you can go onto the app and say, I've got you know, 18 loaves of bread. That's all I got, right? Because there are some organizations that won't bother going to pick up 18 loaves of bread. They're going to say, you know what, it's just not worth our while. Whereas, a church, that likes to feed community kids on a Wednesday night would love to have 18 loaves of bread, right?
Sure.
So these matchmaking apps, which have been springing up all around, those I think really have a place. Um, and so I think those are two things. But I also have to say that we really, a lot of the work that I do really backs up way before that and looks at source reduction and basically says, okay, it's nice if you have 18 loaves of bread at the end of the day and you can find a home for them. But why do you have 18 loaves of bread a day left over? And why, if we actually took the time to collect the data, why would we see a pattern of consistently having 15 to 22 loaves of bread left over every single day? Has nobody noticed this before? And again, this is exactly where the person who works, like one of my students in a green team class I teach that I was talking to a few weeks ago, she works at a grocery store and she works in the bakery. And she's like, oh my gosh, and we throw out so much of this. But they say that they want the shelves to look all full and, blah, blah, blah. And she's seeing it every day. So she's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm throwing this out. I'm not allowed to donate it. And I'm like, okay, so who's the decision maker who's seeing this on a spreadsheet? Are they not like, is nobody doing that math, right? Because you know how much you're selling. You've got all that from your POS system, right? You should know how much you've made. You should have some production sheets or something that says how much you've made. So you ought to be able to do some basic subtraction there and see, you know what I mean? Like, but we really haven't done that. Or it's just something that hasn't been prioritized, maybe because in some of these cases, especially when it comes to things like bread, food costs are relatively low, right? Especially if we're not using any kind of the ingredients we should be using, like certified organic and non-GMO, and that's a whole separate conversation.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I think, and I also think we have to say, okay, so if we're a company with fiduciary responsibility, why do we consistently make 15 to 20 loaves of bread more per night than we need to? So that's question one. And then you might be able to say, you might be able to kind of come back at that and say like, well, but that goes out to the community. So like, don't stop making that excess bread. But you said earlier, you talked about the croissants, the donuts, the all that. Most people who are in situations where they need to rely on food banks and food services like that, they inherently have higher levels of diabetes, heart disease, obesity, and other health problems. They don't need to be eating excess chocolate croissants and bread and the things that they tend to get. And so I feel like if our answer to solving hunger is keep making more excess, like that's no, that's not how you solve that problem, right? It's like, when you have like a health problem and you keep wanting to address the symptom versus the problem under the
The
you're
underlying
looking at
problem.
just the
Hmm.
right. And so I think that obviously, calories are calories, and when people are hungry they need calories. And so, I'm not trying to say like let people starve unless you can give them zucchini. I'm just trying to say that this is a systemic thing that we have to have a more holistic view of, and we have to solve the problem of hunger in a way that is more inclusive of the entire health situation, the food system situation, the economic injustice, all the other things that are creating that hunger situation in the first place, and not let excess bread be the answer, right? And companies, again, donations are still going to happen. Excess is still going to happen. Donations going to still happen. That's all great. We want that to happen. But if companies really want to help the hunger situation in their community, making 15 extra loaves of bread every day is not the way to do that. There are better ways that they can partner with local organizations, and maybe once a month they do an entire meal, an entire healthy, appropriately portioned, high nutrition, meal service, and they serve and they, do outreach and get involved in the community. That would be a much more beautiful way of showing you care and addressing hunger in your community than just sort of like, oh, well, we happen to have 15 loaves of bread left over every day. And I'd rather see companies take that extra 15 loaves of bread, do some math, and say, let's reduce our production output by 15 a day and start tracking the savings. And you know what? We can use that savings to do a food meal service for the community, right? Like there's just a better way of doing these things if we kind of step back and look at it more holistically.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely. And it's so interesting to hear you say this idea of companies that want to that want to have that, as you called it, social impact, taking some of those resources and allocating them towards supporting. uh, I'm plant based. I'm vegan, so I'm like, yay, more salads, yay, and yet, there's an organization that, again, when I used to live in D.C. Oh, excuse me, hold on a sec. Sorry, I had to cough there, and I didn't want to cough in your ear. There's an organization called So Others Might Eat. It's some, and the way things work is there is, you can, if you're volunteering, you can be a volunteer cook, or you can be a volunteer server. And what you do, for example, is you'll put out full service, plates, silverware, napkins, all of that, and there's some kind of very healthy meal with a salad and all these other aspects of a really good, hearty, healthy meal that people who want a meal can come or need a meal can come and eat. And they have different sponsors. So then I come back to this idea of allocating those resources. You mentioned something that is, you said you help companies discover a greater purpose for good in business. And if it's not, oh well, we happen to have these 15 extra loaves of bread every day, if you help them, and when you help them take that and make that, turn that into savings, because they're no longer baking 15 or 22 extra loaves of bread every day, what is the process, do you think, in your mind that has to happen to go from, oh, we've got the savings now, and towards, let's put it to something that is good for the community or good for the homeless population or good for the environment? What do you think needs to happen in order for that to be the result of having that savings?
Yeah, it's a great question because that's not an automatic, right? I mean, in most companies, it's going to be like, oh, great, we saved that money. and, that, and there's not going to necessarily be an offset of like, oh, hey, let's now use that money. I think they probably need to be looked at a little bit separately anyway, right?
Mm,
Because now you can, I think it could be set up so that you almost have sort of a gamification of it, an incentive to encourage the culinary team, like, so I'm thinking even just like at a convention team, you have lots of different, or a convention center, you have a lot of different teams that are making decisions about the food quantity. The
mm-hmm.
event planner gives, oh, here's how many people I think will show up. There's a salesperson who's involved and kind of like, okay, what's the menu we're going to do? The chef, the culinary team, the procurement, all these different people involved. And food waste happens through like padding and numbers and, just stuff like that all along the way. Well, if you were to create an incentive where you could say, if you can, so here's what we sort of expected to spend here. And again, this is a situation where you may have a client involved too, right? And so the client's watching this. So it's not just purely an internal thing. It's not like, it's not like if you go into a hotel and you're just a guest and you go down to the breakfast buffet and you don't know behind the scenes they're doing some cool new thing to reduce food waste and they're going to use that to help the community. But at a
Right.
convention center, the reason I like this example is because there's usually a client involved and multiple stakeholders that are looking at the numbers and will have a definite opinion about where that money saved goes. And so I think that, one way to do it is you could gamify it and kind of say like, well, here's an incentive to manage food waste and, set some sort of thresholds and say for every whatever percent or every pound or every whatever, that we reduce, we're going to donate this much money to a local food bank. right? And give
Mm.
them the money directly, let them allocate it in the community the way they're best positioned to do anyway, right? So you could do something creative and fun and interesting that way. And in an event, the great thing about that is you can also get guests involved. You can put up little signs or, you know, send out a message through your event app that says, hey, we've decided to partner with the local food bank in our effort to reduce food waste. You may notice different portion sizes, or you may notice blah, blah, blah. And, you know, we still want you to be happy. There's always enough food if you need it, because everybody's always worried about that. So there's ways to, you know, I think a lot of times these kind of ideas, everybody's like, no, 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 we can't do it right. Like, well, let's brainstorm, let's get creative, let's think about ways that we can sort of have win-win-win in our approach here. And then I think, you know, another thing is if a company is going to have a a, strategy, a CSR strategy, a social impact strategy, sustainability strategy, whatever, you know, phrase you might want to use for it, if they're going to have a strategy that's going to be about serving the local community, and if one of their commitments is related to hunger, then that commitment should probably be set separately from, oh, let's use the money we reduce through food waste to pay for that. Like that should be a commitment the company makes so that even if they get lean with food waste reduction
Hmm.
and they, you know, get those numbers low, that they're still making a commitment that a certain amount gets invested into the local community. So there could be some benefit in tying those two together, but I also think there could be some challenge in that. I think the key is just to be flexible and creative and to include and invite multiple voices into the decision so that you can come up with something that makes lots of people happy and gives lots of people an opportunity to feel joy and pride for that initiative.
I love that you said that. And the reason is because I always, when I go into companies and do any kind of coaching work, where I'm talking about innovation, I'm talking about creativity and creative thinking and how that empowering your people to think creatively can make amazing changes happen. And so this idea that you've said several times already about having the entire company or organization represented, all the different aspects of the work being represented in the teams that are going to be working on this kind of initiative. It seems to me that people who are doing certain jobs might have a better perspective, informed and involved perspective on what
Mhm.
can be offered. Have you found that to be the case? And if so, how do you help the management, for example, take on that? I would like to figure out a way to ask this so that it makes sense. Sort of take on that mindset of empowering the people who work with them to feel confident in speaking up.
Well, you know, it's interesting. So, like, let's stick with the analogy of food waste.
Mm-hmm.
With food waste, you know, if I go into an organization and I start talking, let's say it's not an organization that's already a client, I might just be, you know, at a networking event or something, and I bring up food waste. I will often hear, oh, well, you'll need to talk to our chef. And to that, I say, mm-mm, no, whatever, I don't know what your title is, but whoever you are, you also have a game, you also have a role to play in food
Mm-hmm.
waste. And so I think part of that is, um, you know, when I ask my clients to invite every member of the organization, every department, oftentimes a common theme is that people from accounting and HR come in like, why are we here?
Mm.
Right? You're gonna make it like, this is a 6 hour training. Like, what? I mean, because it's like a full day. We do this full day thing, right? And they walk in with sort of a like, why am I here?
Right.
And at the end of the day, when I go around and I ask everybody for like, what's your key takeaway? What do you personally feel like you're going to own as a result of this? It's amazing to hear what those people say, because I so often hear them say things like, you know, I came in, I have to admit, I came in not really knowing, you know, what I was doing here, but you know, now, and sometimes they'll even say like, I'm not really sure how I'm going to be involved, but I'm so excited about this. And so I sometimes say to the clients, the key people I'm working with, the executive chef or the general manager, people like that, director of operations, I'll say, listen, make sure you're getting your HR team and your accounting team involved. Here's what you can do. Because I'll tell
Mhm.
you, one of the things that I run across a lot is like, so send me your donation data. Let's see, let me rifle through this drawer and find some invoices that the local, food shelter gave to me when they came to pick it up. Like, no, 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 you got to put this in a spreadsheet. Okay, somebody from accounting wants to help, hand them a stack of, you know, papers that your clipboard where you wrote down how much you donated, and ask them to create a spreadsheet. No, it's not the most exciting work in the world, but it's a great way for them to get involved. And what a great thing if somebody from accounting starts to see this, they're going to start to ask different kinds of questions.
Mm.
Okay, HR, like one of the things that I recommend to a lot of my clients is to do um some job rotation, job sharing, and people to staff tend to love that. Because they feel like, the people in that team, they don't understand, they blah blah blah. And so there's a lot of that. A lot of that stuff bubbles up in the
Mm.
trainings that I do. And
Mhm.
it's a great opportunity to be like, okay, all right, we hear you. And this is good. Let's kind of bring up some of these barriers and what can we do to overcome that. And one of the things that sometimes comes up is job shadowing. Like, if a dishwasher had a job shadow a banquet server for a day, they probably wouldn't complain so much about the way dishes come back to the dish room, right? Or whatever. And so, well, how are you going to pull that off? Well, get HR involved, right? Let them design a job shadow rotation program. And there's other things like maybe, sometimes I have them do like creative posters and stuff. And the person from HR is the person who loves you came up with the best hashtag or something, right? So like it's just about finding, making it's about, I think, making a space where you've given someone an opportunity to even connect the dot that they could add value to something. And
Right.
if you haven't even given them that opportunity, you'll never know that, right? So I think that that's part of it. And that's hard to do, right? Take 6, 7, 8 hours of your day of that many of your staff members and put them in a room. That's a hard ask for organizations. And so I really commend and appreciate the clients I've worked with and organizations who are willing to do that. It's an investment in more. One of my clients gave me the best compliment ever. I talked to her a couple of weeks after the training and I was like, so just in general, like, or I sent an email, this is over email. I said, in general, any thoughts or feedback on the training? And she wrote back and among other things, she said, it has changed the way we look at every single aspect of our operations.
Wow.
Exactly, right? And I was just like, you could not possibly pay me a better compliment because it's about shifting the whole culture of care and responsibility and just looking at things with fresh eyes.
That's amazing. I love that all of a sudden it's like they came awake to something that had been there all along, but you helped them put a real you shone a light on it. And I think that's so
Hmm.
wonderful. When you do this kind of work, and it sounds like you train other people to do it too? How because you're just one person, right? So how do you work with other people to help them keep the reach going? Do you do that, right? You coach social entrepreneurs and
Yep.
help them do a similar kind of thing.
Well, the social entrepreneurs I coach, actually, it's almost like this little. I feel like it's almost like a little side business.
Okay.
But because I'm basically just helping them with, everything from figuring out their own leadership style to creating great pitch decks for a potential, funder or, brainstorming strategy, just basically entrepreneurial coaching is what I'm
Okay.
doing with
Okay.
those. But to go back to your question about, sort of how do um, I guess scale is the right word, what I'm doing when I'm just one person. And it's interesting because that was in theory going to be the problem I was going to have to solve this year.
Mm.
But with COVID, my business sort of came grinding to a bit of a halt because my client's business, kind of ground to a halt. And so
Right.
what was going to be a very busy year of traveling and training, doing lots of workshops, and I was launching a new workshop series for hotels and just had lots of speaking opportunities lined up and all kinds of that, all that stuff. And so I do still think about that because I do it scaling the knowledge is part of the master plan.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing that's been, I think a lot of us have seen COVID as both a devastating and blessing in disguise kind of moment in our lives, depending on how we respond to it, and what it brings it our way. And one of the things that it's given me an opportunity to do is work a little bit more on the digital side of things, to develop more online assets and training, and really
Mm-hmm.
think through a little bit more what that might look like,
Right.
and kind of up my game on some new technology tools that I've been playing around with, and developing in, and just really, even just more recently, the project that I've been working on, which I would explain more, but it's going to be announced in a few weeks at a conference. But it's very exciting, big sustainability training program in the events industry. And one of the modules that I had to create was on accessibility, accessible events, and
Mm-hmm.
that just opened up a whole new world of awareness for me that I just really had not explored before.
Mm-hmm.
And just even creating online training that is accessible to
Right.
people with various limitations, even like the ability to use a mouse. And I mean, it was just like, oh my gosh. So I'm always grateful when my own skill sets and assumptions are challenged, and so this year has been a little bit of that. And I hope, I'm not sure what it will look like moving forward. But I'm hopeful that people continue to care about sustainability. I continue to get asked to speak on webinars and conferences, and I'm happy to know that this is still an important topic. And I do believe very strongly that my approach to it, in terms of just empowering people and giving them the the knowledge and the tools that they need to just take one step at a time. I think there's really something beautiful about that, and people appreciate it. And so I just have to keep putting my one step and one foot in front of the other, and just know that it will pay off in down the road in one way or another, with just a greater impact in terms of what the people I teach, they're making planetary and community impact, but also just knowing that I can have a viable business doing this.
And it's an extremely necessary and critical business as far as as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's been so much that you've said that it makes me just giddy and happy because of the
Oh,
work that you're
good.
doing. There are things that we haven't even gotten to talk about, and I would love to change directions just a little bit, if it's okay with you. And
Sure.
I want to talk a little bit about something that you talked about briefly when we've talked about the end user as far as helping your local community. But there's also another aspect of it, like you said before it gets to the end. In the beginning, where do you get the resources? How do you get the resources that you're going to be using to make whatever it is you're making, to do whatever it is you're doing, like buying local and using local contractors, all of that. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to what the importance is of buying locally, of doing business locally. Why should we be doing it? What are the benefits and what are the challenges in doing it?
Well, I'll start with the challenge, because this is just one of those things where, in full transparency, I just think about the amount of stuff I buy online that gets shipped
Mm,
from, you know, goodness knows where. I mean, one of the blessings of COVID is I recently got two puppies, and I haven't had pets
babies.
for years. I know, and I haven't had pets. I used to have cats, and I haven't had pets in years. And so just the amount of stuff you have to buy when
Oh
you
yeah.
have a new pet, and because of everything with COVID, but there is, one of the things I did is I did look for local pet stores within, about a 60, because I live in a small town, so I kind of expanded my radius to about 60 miles, and looking at some local pet stores. And at one point I did go to one to kind of like, okay, I want to be able to know what they have, and I want to support their business. I want to practice what I preach in this regard. But it can be challenging, and this is what I'm experiencing, what a lot of us are experiencing on sort of a micro scale, is the problem that companies have. We are all about convenience, and we're all about cost.
Mm-hmm.
And buying local can be very challenging in those regards. And so I actually do a whole, webinar and, a lot of detail on how to overcome those things and then and why those things are the way they are. But just to, kind of keep it brief for here and to answer your question, I think that the importance of buying local is just, basic research shows that a significantly higher portion of revenue stays in a local community when you buy from a local business versus a big box retailer or a global corporation. That is in regard to the salaries, the salary that stays local, the tax money that stays local, and other things that local businesses, but local businesses tend to buy from other local businesses. So it has sort of like that, um,
Cumulative
yeah,
effect.
exactly, exactly. And so the benefit of local from that perspective, from an purely economics perspective, is that it is better for the community. It's also very important to me. You can't have a conversation about buying local without emphasizing the need to foster entrepreneurship and opportunity for minorities, women, and veteran owned businesses. They get a disproportionate share of investment and bank loans. Statistics show it's shocking, as well as a disproportionate um, uh, spend from corporate dollars. And so buy local is an opportunity to elevate and amplify those business owners that are disadvantaged, often just because of basic justice imbalance in our country and in the world. So I think that's another piece of it. I think in the hospitality business, there's a product design element to it, and that is, I have this one slide I show, and I change it up depending on what market I'm in, but I'll show like a basic, your basic run of the mill hotel sundry shop, the little shop in the lobby, right?
That has the
With
hats and
it,
things, right?
yeah, and it has the standard brands of potato chips and soda that you can see in any market anywhere in the US and probably even in most other countries as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then I will do a little research, again, depending, because I do these presentations in various markets, and I'll do a little research on the market that I'm speaking in. Or if I'm doing a podcast, I'll sometimes just randomly choose a market and do some research. And I'll find locally made juices, beers, whatever, candies, snacks, and I'll do screenshots of the websites, or I'll just get, photos, and I'll say, if you're a guest in a hotel, would you rather be able to shop from these items or these items, right? The typical crap you can get, sorry, but it is crap. Yeah, the typical crap you can get in most, convenience stores everywhere versus a curated group of products from local entrepreneurs where you can tell the story of the entrepreneur. And because generally that's going to be made from local, especially the food products, right? But this goes beyond food, but the food products are going to be made from local food. And when you buy locally, one of the reasons why buying local food is so valuable is when you shorten the supply chain, you increase the nutritional value and flavor of the product. So when you buy an apple that's picked, within an hour of your house, right in the peak of the season when it's supposed to be, it's going to taste vastly different than the one that was shipped 3,000 miles and ripened in a container
Right.
with a million other apples. Right? There's a big difference in the taste as well as the nutritional value of that apple. So local products tend to be made with local ingredients. There tends to be greater transparency and the insight into how those products are made, and from a labor perspective, from an ingredient sourcing perspective, and things like that. So the local products, if you're a hotel or any other kind of business where you can offer those kinds of products, you could provide. I mean, think about the memories that you associate with something that you eat, right? And so if I think about when I travel, right? I'm a business traveler. I travel a lot, and I always like to buy my nieces little gifts when I travel places. And I always want it to be something like, I'm not going to buy a souvenir in Paris that was made in China, right? I
Right.
want something that I know is made. I want it to be authentically Parisian when I, carry it all the way back home for them. And so I think that there's just so many wonderful benefits to buy local, but in the hospitality space, that's certainly one of them. And the challenges are just really about convenience, scale, obviously, because sometimes like if you need 10,000 bars of soap for your hotel and you're trying to, source from a little local person that might only sell 10,000 bars per year, like you have to say, well, wait a minute, does that mean that we're just going to say no to this? Or do we believe that this might be an entrepreneur that we could invest in and help them learn how to scale their business to accommodate our needs, plus, maybe expand even beyond that? So there's just a lot of really beautiful opportunities when it comes to buying local.
Interesting. I have a bizarre question. What about when local isn't an option? And I
Yep.
understand what you're saying, that, okay, yes, of course, then instead of going 60 miles away, you'd go 75 miles away and it's whatever.
Oh,
But
totally. Yes.
yeah, so, but for example,
Olive oil. Olive oil
olive
is one of
oil.
my, yes, one of my favorite examples. This is one I use a lot. Avocados, olive oil, oranges. Yeah, I mean, if you live, I actually have, this again, I'm referring to a visual that I have where, I say if you're in Milwaukee, Wisconsin and you have a restaurant, are you going to not use olive oil because it doesn't grow within 500 miles of you? No. You're still going to have olive oil. So in this case, you'd be better off sourcing from California over Chile, China, Italy, right? Just because of the supply chain and it's, maybe as local as it can get.
Mm-hmm.
That said, if you're running an Italian restaurant, I think it's perfectly acceptable that you source authentic Italian olive oil from Italy, right? But then I think that it's really buy local is just one component of a more sustainable sourcing and purchasing formula, right? So if you can't buy local, you really ought to be thinking like, is it fair trade? Is it non-GMO? Is it organic? Does it respect biodiversity? Does it have any other kind of certification or authentic, verifiable sustainability benefit that can offset the fact that it's not a local option? And so I think that that's an opportunity for people who say, like, well, I just, like you say, the local option isn't available. Okay, well, then apply that same sense of, um, concern and that same, um, and initiative, but looking at it through some different lenses. And if it's food, then think of it through the lens of certified organic and those other things I listed. If it's a gift of some sort, then make sure it's fair trade, or that you have insight into the supply chain and how something was made and where something was made.
It's interesting. It feels like it's an awareness thing, that it's an investment and an awareness thing based on individual ideas. And uh, I'll give you an example. When I worked at NASA doing environmental education, I helped schools set up compost piles near the schools so that they could compost some of their cafeteria food waste. And then they put that compost into the school garden, which we started, and they grew vegetables. And then they used the vegetables and the herbs to make a big meal for everyone at the school at the end of the year. So it was
I
a
love
long.
it.
It was great. It was. I did this with several schools in Prince George's County in Maryland, and it was great. And I think some of them are still doing it. But the point I'm making is that it was a longer term proposition.
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't a, oh, we're just going to change this practice. It was, we're going to do this differently, and that is going to lead to this new way of doing things, and that is going to lead to something else. And it means a commitment to that, and it means an investment in it that's a little bit longer term. When you work with these companies or organizations, how do they deal with these long-term processes and setting up these procedures so that they'll work, again, sustainably, so that they can sustain these processes for the long term rather than just, oh, we made a change and now things are either happening or they're not?
Yeah, that's still a very tricky part. Um, just even the buy local example, I'm aware of an organization that really wanted to embrace the buy local, had identified some great local partnerships, just everything all set to go. And then there was just months and months and months and months of corporate negotiation, going back and forth with the corporate procurement office and getting permission to go outside of the normal purchase, because most purchasing, corporate purchasing, it's very bound by preset contracts with a limited number of suppliers, and those suppliers may be distributors for other smaller suppliers. So then how do you get into their catalog and all that? And so I'll admit I'm not aware of a whole lot of great examples of companies that have consistently overcome that. Um, because again, buy local means you have to change it's going to be a different policy or a different number. You might have some sort of like, oh, we're going to do a minimum of 20% buy local. Okay, 20% of your raw material costs, 20% of your sales, 20% of your vendors, like what does this look like? And then that's, in some markets that's going to be easier than in other markets. And so if you think about the whole way that corporate systems are designed, they're designed for efficiency, right? It's all about optimizing everything for efficiency and automating everything. Well, when you buy local, that's tough. It's really, especially smaller businesses are not as sophisticated. And this is why when I talk to audiences about this, I'm often encouraging them to consider being mentors and recognizing going in that this is not going to be like shopping off the shelf of their other suppliers,
Mm-hmm.
that it's going to inherently be a different kind of setup, because that's just what it means to do business with a small business. But then you have to set some goals, I think, going in, so that when you hit all those obstacles, you have a commitment, or we're either doing this or we're not, right? And if we are, then what sort of resources and um, leverage do we have to get, past some of those objections and barriers and just, typical corporate stuff, right? It's just the bureaucracy of large companies, right? And I mean, you think about the hospitality industry, you think about the events industry, you've got a lot of big players that are very corporate. And then you've got a lot of, especially in the restaurant industry, a lot of small players, right? And so mostly I'm trying to get in front of the corporate players and encourage them to loosen that, tight, strict policy and be willing to have some flexibility and work with and foster those local businesses.
And again, it's this buy-in.
Hmm.
I don't care for that phrase because it feels transactional, but it is a shift in the way we're looking at it. And you mentioned something that we sort of touched on and then moved off real quickly. You mentioned something called green teams. Do I imagine that that's a team of people that is sort of whose goal is to set up some of these practices or something like that.
Hmm.
If it is, what is a green team and how would you set them up in a company like the one you were just talking about, and what is their goal? What is their purpose?
So a green team is generally a cross-functional team of people, volunteers
Mm-hmm.
often, that are charged with environmental and social impact activities.
Mm-hmm.
Different companies define it and set them up in different ways. You can call them whatever you want, right? Green teams is kind of a common term, but you see all kinds of custom names for them. And they are they're set up in different ways. So like I said earlier, sometimes they're just basically an add-on to a safety, like in hotels, I see this a lot. I see either, oh, we have a monthly safety meeting and we just
Mm-hmm.
kind of tack green stuff on to the end of that, or an executive team, that's 15 minutes of their monthly meeting agenda might be devoted to, the green stuff, environmental stuff. But I run a course on green teams. It's a just a course open for anybody, but it also happens to run as a college course, and more than 100 college students, even over the last 8 months during COVID, have started green teams where they work, launched green teams, and done things like had toilets switched out and had electric vehicle charging stations installed, and had landscaping services changed and things like that. And so it can be a very grassroots thing that a person can go to their manager and say, hey, I want to do this. Can I, can we be allowed to meet? And sometimes, like, I remember last term, one of my students who works at a major hotel that really touts a lot of sustainability stuff. The whole 3 months of the semester, he was waiting on permission from HR to start a green team. Oh, they say that we can't. I'm like, that's crap. That's. I told him, I said, listen, I hate to say this to you, but that's their way of brushing you off. They don't have to deal with you right now, and so they're making some sort of BS corporate HR email usage baloney to get you to just go away. But and I try to encourage him to keep up the good work and keep trying to move it forward. And then sometimes students will be like, like they'll go to their boss, their manager, well, I'm taking this course and I have to start a green team. So their manager will be like, okay, fine, like within, as long as I don't see it disrupting business, then okay, whatever. And then by the end of the term, they're like, my boss has been coming to me and asking me my thoughts on this and giving me more responsibility. And now they really want to add more people to the green team. And so I love that, man. I live for hearing things like that. Totally. And I think that what's really um, been unfortunate about the way green teams have been considered in a lot of places I go, it's like, oh, yeah, well, we have a green team. Okay, so show me like evidence that you've met. Show me like who's on the green team. And that's when you'll hear something like, oh, well, it's the last 15 minutes of the, safety meeting. Like, well,
Right.
that's not really a green team, right? And so then in the hospitality industry, you'll also hear a lot of, and same probably for retail and other industries, oh, well, we have too much turnover, too many, our schedules are all over the place,
Mm.
English as a second language. And to all that, I again say baloney, because who made the decision that a green team has to be a permanent fixture? Okay, so you have high turnover. Maybe a green team is just a 3 month rotational thing. Figure it out. Like, like don't make it so much more difficult by putting all these restrictions on what it has to be or doesn't have to be in terms of like who's on it, number of people. The point is to make it inclusive. The point is to make it inviting. The point is to make it practical so that the people on the team feel like they can actually do something. And even if that something is move a can 5 feet and show an uptick in can recycling or glass or whatever, then that's okay. Celebrate that and move on. So I think that there's just so many different variations of what a green team can be and what it can focus on. It can be all about volunteering, like, oh, we're going to have a team that works on creating community outreach projects. Okay, fine. Maybe it's a team that focuses all on, lighting upgrades, whatever. Okay. But I think that it's about giving a voice to different people in the organization who have different insights and understandings of how sustainability can be implemented. And so, an example of that might be in a hotel. If you get an enthusiastic student who works the front desk, oh, I'm going to start a green team, and he or she invites all their friends that are also work the front desk, and they decide, and they get the ear of the procurement manager, and they decide, let's switch to this cleaning product because it's going to be better and this is why we love it and whatever. Did anybody invite anybody from housekeeping into this meeting? Did you guys even, did anybody think to maybe talk to housekeeping about this? Because first of all, housekeeping might know something about, even as sustainable and beautiful as this idea you have is, they might understand something about the equipment they use, other stuff that you don't know. And even if what you chose would be the best possible thing, the fact that you didn't include them means they will probably sabotage your idea.
Oh my.
right? And so, I mean, because they're going to be like, this doesn't work. It's too sticky. It's too, like, a lot of green cleaning products get criticized that way because people don't use them according to the formulation they're supposed to.
Mm,
And so then they're like, oh, they're too sticky. It's like because you use too much. And they think they need to use too much because they think more is better. I think more gets a cleaner, right? So there's just, it's a whole, again, a whole different conversation. But it's just, okay, well, what a difference it would have made if somebody from housekeeping had been invited to be part of that conversation, and not just a, hey, come to this one meeting, we're going to change to green cleaning products, but a series of even text messages, right? Like, oh, we all work different shifts where we can't all be at the same place at the same time. Yeah, but you can all use WhatsApp. I mean, COVID has taught us that we can, people who used to think they could never work remotely, now it's just like they probably don't even think they can go back, right?
right.
And so, same thing with green teams. I tell my students all the time, I'm like, your meeting can be over WhatsApp. Don't get all hung up on the idea that it has to be in a particular conference room at a particular time. Figure out ways to communicate. Have little micro meetings. Share YouTube videos on these topics with everyone, and just, the green team meeting consists of watching a 5-minute YouTube video and then exchanging thoughts over text. So it's just kind of thinking outside the box and creating an opportunity to have cross functional dialogue about sustainability.
And that's that. Wow. Yeah. And it's funny. You said, well, we're changing these cleaning products, and wouldn't it have been good if we'd invited housekeeping? Aren't they the ones with boots on the ground? Wouldn't their perspective be so crucial to the decision that is made, rather than, oh, by the way, this is being put on you?
Mm-hmm.
Instead, going, hey, we want you to be part of the process to choose which one of these green products will be the best for you to do your job. So,
Exactly.
so I love that, and I think it's so important to have that sense of including the people who have, another word that I'm not thrilled about is stakeholders, but it is true. If you've got a stake in how it's going to work, it would be really great if you were invited to be part of the process to make sure that it works really well, because no one knows your job better than you know your job.
Exactly.
So yes, I love that you do this work, Aurora. I love that you do this work. It's critical, and I'm so grateful that you were willing and able to come on the show and talk about all of this. It's important. When I talk to work with students, and we talk about the difference between weather and climate. Weather is whether or not you're going to need an umbrella today. Climate is what's going to happen for the next 10-15 years, right? So
Mm-hmm.
so this is a longer term view of things. The small change, like moving the recycling bin over 5 feet, in the moment you recycle more cans, but over the long term, I think you end up with much bigger changes than you can even imagine. So I think the work
Exactly.
you're doing is fabulous, and as I said, so important. I would
Thank
love.
you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I would love, if it's okay with you, to ask you one last question.
Sure.
It's a question. Well, actually, no. If you have time, can I ask two questions?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So the first question is, I would love to know, what is your vision for the future? What is your vision for our future moving forward?
Gosh, that's really tough right now. First of all, I have to say that I've just never been one of those 5-year plan kind of people. I've never, like anytime, this happens all the time in corporate environments, or school environments, like, what's your vision? You write down your goals for 5 years. And I've just never been good at that. I'm just kind of always been, for better or worse, a little bit of a live in the moment person. But
Mm-hmm.
I would say my vision is less about, where I see us in 5 years, and my vision is more about an inspirational future scenario where there is a shift in an awakening and a shift in the culture, that where people can be empowered at the ground level, where where people can take a step at a time and feel, and it doesn't have to all be so politicized, doing the right thing, and the whole even idea of doing the right thing. I mean, who gets to decide what that is, right? Like I said, I recently saw that article that was, you know, most consumers' priority for sustainability is the wrong one. I mean, it was something to that effect. And it's just like, oh God, no, like why? Why are we judging the thing that people think they ought to be doing? I mean, it's not wrong. It's just that the infrastructure is imperfect and we need improvements and we need to get them to care about other things as well, not
Right.
instead of, right?
Right.
So I think it's just maybe my vision is more of a hope. I guess I'm kind of formulating this out loud. I didn't really have like a nice canned answer for this one, but I think maybe it's more like a hope that it will be possible for people to feel more empowered and more and to ask why more about things like this, about, issues related to sustainability, and to be willing to take small steps and celebrate them. So I think it's, maybe just, it's not so much a prognostication as it is a hope. I hope that's a satisfactory answer.
Absolutely. And vision is what I hope is really what I meant, not like where will we be in 7.5 years? That's not
Yeah,
it at
yeah.
all. But because because it is there, I feel I'm an optimist at heart, and I feel like we need to have hope and planning, both, and then
Yeah.
follow both of those up with
Yes.
actions, right? So that's my that and it's a question that I wanted to ask you specifically because of the work you're doing, because it is this short-term actions will lead to long-term
Hmm.
results kind of work, and I think that's so,
Well, and
as I
actually,
said, so important.
and if I were going to state it the way it's stated on my website, I think it goes something like, my vision is that anyone in any position can take any step towards sustainability.
There you go. And you might have just answered my last question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And the last question is something that I ask of every guest who comes on the show. And it is a silly little question, but it's one that I find sometimes gets really surprising answers. And here is the question: if you had an airplane, of course, sustainable, right? If you had an airplane who that could skywrite anything in the sky for the whole world to see, what would you say?
Oh my goodness. Well, gee, that is such a great question. I think I would say peace. And I think that that seems so, like, part of me is just like, oh my gosh, are you like such a hippie, Aurora? Like, but honestly, the word peace has really resonated with me over the last year because first of all, it's just when you're anxious, what's the opposite of anxiety? Peace.
Mm,
What's the opposite of contention? Peace. And what's the opposite of argument and criticism, right? Like all of these things that I think a lot of us are quite frankly a little bit sick of, right? And even when things are great in the sort of political sphere and health sphere of the world, you might be in a bad marriage or like,
right.
in a class you don't like or whatever, right? So peace is kind of the antidote, I guess, to some of those things. But also, I created this little acronym about peace for my um, business, like that I want uh, a Strato to be about sustainability being practical, right? And that it's very approachable, it's enjoyable and approachable, and it's just all these things that are positive, 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 right? Like I'm all about like, can we please be positive about the things that we need to do to move forward and focus on the things that we can celebrate and that bring joy versus the negative and the things that just scare people and make people really quite frankly want to stick their heads in the sand. I mean, it's no wonder that a lot of people do that. And I will have to add, I didn't bring this up earlier, but I think one of the things that people need to understand when you bring up sustainability and it gets rejected, I think most of the time, the person isn't rejecting you or the notion of sustainability. I think most of the time what's happening is people don't like to look dumb, and they're not going to talk about something. They're not going to engage on a topic that they're not familiar with and knowledgeable about, because people don't like looking dumb.
Mm,
And so I think that, a peaceful and a positive approach allows people to go, I don't know what you're talking about. Can you tell me more?
right.
And I don't have to fear that you're trying to make me look dumb. And I don't have to fear that you're trying to make me feel bad for my life choices. And people will disengage immediately on sustainability because of those two things, I think, more than anything else. I don't understand climate change, so I'm not even going to talk to you about it. Or I don't want to have to give up my plastic water bottles, so I'm not even going to have a conversation with you. And so the door is closed before there's ever an opportunity to show that it's so much more, and to say, like, okay, not willing to give up those plastic water bottles. Let's talk about what you are willing to give up, because eventually I'll get you around the plastic water bottles, right? Like, I'm going to get you there. But if that's not where you want to start, that's not where we're going to start, right? So I think that that would be just to have a more positive and peaceful approach to sustainability.
I love it. I think that's a beautiful and elegant way of saying it. And if it, the way my acupuncturist put it to me once a long time ago, she said, if not this door, another door. And, you know, and I love that, and I live by that. Yeah, this might not be the path. That's okay. There will probably be another one. Let's look for it together. And it's about being inviting to me also, just inviting people in instead of going, you should be. How about we talk about what we could do together? And
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
there's the very different way of looking at things when you approach it from that mindset. I want to thank you again, Aurora, for joining me on the show. I want to make sure that we say this in the show so that it's there, but I'm also going to put your social media links in the show notes. But if you could just go through real quickly and tell us what your Instagram and Facebook and your website, all of those links, to make sure that they're in the show. And then I'll
Sure.
also, of course, put all the links in the show notes for you as well.
Absolutely. So the website is www.astrapto.com. That's ASTRAPTO. And on Instagram and Facebook, we are at Astrapto Academy, all one word, Astrapto Academy. And also have some stuff on YouTube. And there's not a handle for that, but if you just go to our other channels, you'll see links to that. And on Twitter, also at Astrapto Academy. So you can find us on all those channels. I will admit that for the last 5 or 6 weeks, I have been a little bit silent on social media. So November is my get back in gear month. I've just been working on becoming a new puppy mom,
Oh,
and
yes.
also a major client project, which I'm super grateful for, but just completely consumed my time. So I'm looking forward to getting back and engaging, and would love to hear from people and hear their thoughts, comments, questions, and hopefully provide some amount of encouragement to help people take that next step on their sustainability journey.
Wonderful. I'm so glad. And I'm so glad that you are open to people connecting with you. If you want to connect with Aurora Benton, you now know where to find Aurora Benton at Astrapto. And this is Isolde Trachtenberg. I'm so grateful to you again, Aurora. I'm also grateful to you that you listen to the show. And I invite you to subscribe to the show to get more of these kinds of in-depth conversations with people who are thinking differently. They're innovators. They've tapped into their genius and they're using it to change the world. Until next time, this is Isolde Trachtenberg, and I invite you to listen, learn, laugh, and love a lot. Thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to the podcast if you're new, and if you like what you're hearing, please review it and rate it and let other people know. And if you'd like to be a sponsor of the show, I'd love to meet you on patreon.com/innovative mindset. I also have lots of exclusive goodies to share just with the show's supporters there. Today's episode was produced by Isolde Trachtenberg and is copyright 2021. As always, please remember this is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Past performance does not guarantee future results, although we can always hope. Until next time, keep living in your innovative mindset.